This mug right here is really important to me. It represents the finalization of starting a goal and ending it probably 15 years later. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about how I got into ArtCenter, how I developed a portfolio, the journey that I took in order to get to ArtCenter, and just a few tips and tricks for when you're trying to develop your very own portfolio, things to keep in mind. Like probably a lot of you out there, as a kid, maybe a 10-year-old, I was just completely obsessed with cars and sketching cars, and pretty much every day I would be drawing cars. My family would be watching a movie and I'd be sitting there with a sketchbook with a pen in my hand and just sketching out different ideas. Wasn't always cars, sometimes it was products too, but definitely cars were my obsession. My dad was and still is just completely obsessed with cars, and my mom was an interior designer, and so I think my upbringing was sort of a combination of the two. But I love to create things, I love to sketch, and then suddenly one day I got a book in my hand, and it was not too similar or not too different from this book here. In fact, scratch that. I think this was the exact book that I got when I was maybe 8, 9 years old. Definitely showing its age at this point. I think this sketch was made in like 2001. I mean, beautiful sketch. But this, towards the end, is pretty cool. Different unique styles in here from all different kind of eras, so pretty fun to look at. But towards the end, this book talks a lot about design schools. I started getting obsessed with these images. Just thought it was so cool that you could take something from a pencil or pastel / marker sketch, maybe this is, and turn it into something like that. But then this section here, schools. This here, the first school shown is ArtCenter College of Design in Pasadena, California. And I just thought this was so intriguing reading about this and learning that transportation design is an actual field you can go into. And there's a school not too far from me. I grew up in Oregon, so this is only maybe 1,000 miles away, which sounds like a lot, but really isn't too bad. And this kind of began my obsession with trying to figure out how to get into this school. Of course, I considered College for Creative Studies in Detroit and other schools, but this is the one that I was kind of locked onto. Now, you may be attempting to go to a different school, say CCS in Detroit, or maybe University of Cincinnati, or somewhere in Europe. And I'm going to try to make sure that all of these portfolio tips are applicable to those schools as well. Nothing in this video is going to be specific towards ArtCenter, but I'm just talking about my own personal journey. Maybe you can learn something from that. I think the most important thing that you can do is just to make sure you're constantly sketching. You're constantly practicing. You can never sketch enough. I've been sketching probably since I was like 9 or 10 years old. And still I get super rusty. I work as a designer full-time, and yet I still think I can always use more practice. And I think in today's age, a lot of people have the tendency to jump right into Photoshop or digital tablets. I think you have to learn the basics. Just sketch as much as you can, and before you start getting into those tools, try to figure out how you can mentally connect putting your pen to the paper and drawing exactly what you're thinking of. This is going to take many, many hours of practice, but I promise it's going to be the #1 thing that you can do to develop your portfolio. I really enjoyed sketching as a kid, so this came pretty naturally to me. And the more that I did that, the more I just really got into it. I would look up images online and see how other people were sketching things maybe better than I was, and noticing maybe they have ellipse guides or they have markers. And so during Christmas, I would always ask for those sorts of things. And I would start buying markers on my own, buying different pencils, trying things out, just sketching constantly, becoming really obsessed with it, and then doing some really rudimentary marker and pastel work. I mean, my initial stuff was total garbage, but that's where you start, and it's fine if it doesn't look super great right away. So I got markers and more supplies, and I started getting just a little bit more confident with my capabilities. Now, when I started getting really confident, I started taking the leap and posting online. Back in the day, I think this was maybe 2007 or 2008. I was just a tiny little teenager, maybe a preteen at that point. And the only websites really available to do that were a site called speedanddesign.net, I believe it was called, and then Car Spy Shots. And both of these were just fantastic. You would go in and post your sketches online and get a lot of feedback from other people. There was also, interesting competitions that were on there. And the landscape has changed a little bit today. I think it's a little bit harder maybe on Instagram or Facebook or wherever you're posting sketches to get a lot of feedback. But you can still do exactly the same thing. There are still design competitions that are out there. But these two sites for me were just amazing. And I think it's important to remember that if you're looking for comments on your work, it's always good to critique other people's work too. Following this, like I said, I got a lot of feedback online and I got a lot of feedback in person. I was just constantly sketching. And there was a very large national young design competition that I saw posted online. It was sponsored by a company called Haggerty. They do collector car insurance. And it sounded really interesting to me. It was basically to create a modern interpretation of a 1959 Cadillac. The idea was that you would sketch out your ideas in a variety of different views and talk about the technology you're thinking of incorporating into it. So I sketched out some really kind of crazy looking marker renderings of this really exaggerated proportions Cadillac with a hydrogen motor. And at the time, that was sort of the GM hydrogen skateboard that I was incorporating into the concept. And it was super, super fun. The second part of that competition was to have people vote online. And so the top 3 people who got the most votes would then go on to the finals, which were held in Pebble Beach. And if you don't know Pebble Beach, that's one of the major car shows in the entire world. There's a ton of events that happen. There's vintage car racing. There's Concorso Italiano, which is just a giant field of Ferraris and Lamborghinis, Fiats, Alfa Romeos. Great collection of vintage Italian cars. Concept cars as well that you only see in magazines, really. Of course, Pebble Beach, the concours that is held there is pretty much the main piece of that entire week. And just tons and tons of cars all over Central California are within this show, and it's just a great time. So I was lucky enough to receive enough votes to go on this trip. And we were taken around by Haggerty and their team. We got to go to a lot of these things. We went to the vintage races. We went to some of the concours shows. Then we were having to talk about our designs in front of a panel of guests. These were famous people within the car industry. They would then judge the final 3 and see who would get first place, second place, third place. This was super fun to me. It was a lot of fun to talk about my own designs in front of a crowd, and I was only 15 at the time, so it seemed very big and it was very cool and exciting. I was lucky enough to win the first place prize, which was really exciting for me. It was kind of the first time that I won a major design award, and so incredibly exciting as a teenager. At the end of that show, I was talking to someone and they reassured me that ArtCenter would be the place to go. We talked about different ways to get in, what I'd have to do to develop my portfolio further, things that I would have to learn and be ready for as an ArtCenter student. And again, this was super exciting for me. I then took a trip down to ArtCenter to see what it was like in person, and it was just breathtaking. It was so cool seeing all these people work on their own designs. And I mean, as a kid, it just seems so incredible that is an actual job and an actual thing that you can learn in school. I mean, just that was completely my passion. One of the things I was told was, you don't need to make every project a sports car. In fact, you may get better feedback if you have other vehicles in there. If you're doing some really forward-thinking vehicle types or just a wide variety, this helps the people judging your portfolio to understand exactly what your work is like. So you don't want to show exactly the same thing over and over and over. So sports cars can get a little boring if you're just showing that. And then the second thing I was told about some of my work was that it wasn't super forward thinking. So I, at the time, was able to sketch cars, but I was almost throwing bits and pieces from modern cars on there. And as a designer, that's not what you want to do. You want to show that you can come up with something completely new and develop something that's super exciting for the modern era, or something that is good for the future. My first portfolio was something like this. This was a project called North American Alfa Romeo. I think at the time we hadn't had any Alfa Romeos in the States. And so I was envisioning a sedan for, I think, the year 2020. That was my goal. You'll see that there's a lot of different sketches in here, a lot of variety, and you'll start to notice the refinement that's put in there and call outs describing exactly what I was thinking, making those design decisions. This is very important. It shows that you know what you're doing, that you're thinking through things in a design sense and can make decisions. But there's not a lot of variety here, and it's not incredibly forward thinking. Granted, this was, I think, 2013, so there's some interesting forms and shapes in there, but I could work on proportions, I could work on my technique a little bit more. Compact Buick 2020 was another project I did that was envisioning a compact sort of sports coupe for the brand Buick. A lot of sketches thrown in here, a lot of different variety of ideas, different avenues of direction that I could have taken, which is a good thing to show. But again, there's some weird kind of proportion issues in here, and I could have been a little bit more daring with my design work. Always push yourself just beyond the level of comfort that you want to show. So with that portfolio that I just showed you, I was super excited because I actually got accepted to ArtCenter with that portfolio. It wasn't maybe the greatest or the most polished, but I did get accepted and I got some scholarship reward for it. But it wasn't quite enough. I was still working and going to community college ahead of time to try to get some of those credits transferred into ArtCenter so I wouldn't have to pay for all the terms possible. It's a very expensive school. But I was a little disappointed with how much scholarship reward I was getting. And so I took another term to develop my portfolio and came up with completely new projects. And this is that portfolio. So I talked to a lot of people about different ways I could develop my portfolio and make it better. One of the things was to create a more clear format, a more simplistic sort of guided experience through the portfolio. So here was some of my information, table of contents showing what specific projects I was going to be working on or showing off in this portfolio. I did like this Alfa Romeo project, so I just kind of beefed it up a little bit, made it a little bit more clear, a little bit of a mood board here, and then dive into sketches more even spacing, a little bit easier to read. And then you'll see I have callouts down here at the bottom, just making it a little bit more clear. Little visual cues kind of showing certain things that I was thinking about. These are very generic when I look at it now, but this was sort of the idea of making things a little bit more clear visually. Then I did a clay model. I just wanted to further develop this project out. You can always do stuff like that, think outside the box, maybe do a 3D model. And then started developing an interior. I wasn't sketching interiors a lot at the time, but never hurts to show it, really. Thinking through my thoughts here. Yet another project. This was a sort of compact SUV for Toyota. Again, callouts, visual cues, certain things that I'm thinking. I'm thinking about technology and incorporating, a vehicle package. This was a very simplistic one, but got the idea across. More marker renderings, further developing my technique, my skills. Then I kept being told, Austin, just push yourself past what you think you need to do. So instead of developing a car for 2020, I was thinking, what would it look like if we created a vehicle for 2040? This was for brand Citroen. Again, thinking through a mood board, and just starting to create some crazy ideas. I mean, sometimes when you're doing stuff like this, you may think, oh, this may not be the most clever idea, but the idea is to show that you can develop forms, you can think through different shapes, be just creative in general. This was kind of like a flying car, I guess. And it was just fun to start doing stuff like this. Very, very futuristic. So that portfolio that you saw right there was seen as better in general, more clear, more creative, a lot more kind of forward thinking. And this in turn gave me what I wanted. It helped me secure a little bit more scholarship money to get through ArtCenter in a more affordable fashion. During my time at ArtCenter, I did end up switching majors, and maybe I can create a video discussing the reasons why. But that portfolio did allow me to get into transportation design on quite a lot of scholarship money. So how can you get in? I have a few tips I can share with you. For one thing, I think you have to love what you're doing. That'll make it so much easier because it's going to be a lot of work and you're going to have to practice a lot to develop your skills. But honestly, it's incredibly easy if you love what you're doing. Continue to just learn as much as you can from people online. I mean, there's so much information out there, so many great designers that you can learn from, great videos that describe design process. Burt Kaplan is a really great YouTuber who has great videos on the subject, as well as the Sketch Monkey. He does amazing videos. Learn as much as you can, soak in as much knowledge as you can. Go on Instagram, talk to designers and see if they can provide a little bit of input into your own sketches. And again, provide comments on other people's sketches. A big one is to just step out of your comfort zone. There's a lot of people who get stuck in their certain specific way of sketching, their techniques that they do again and again, their certain styling cues. I'm a victim of that. I catch myself a lot of times sketching similar lines, and I have to remind myself to break free of that and come up with something that I wouldn't normally do to provide a little bit of variety and switch up my design style. I would say another big thing is stick with the basics as long as you can. I mean, just sketch with a pen and paper over and over and over again. Get yourself a sketchbook and fill it up, and then sketch into another sketchbook and fill that one up. You don't have to get anything fancy. You can just get a Bic Crystal. This is probably one of the best pens out there. I still use these in the professional design world. And it's really all you're gonna need for a very long time. Don't be tempted to get into Photoshop or do 3D modeling right away. Just put hand on the paper. And again, lastly, just practice makes perfect. That's the biggest thing. Just sketch as much as you possibly can. It'll come more naturally to you. It is building muscle memory, and you're just going to get more and more used to it. I still need this in my daily life, you know, practicing really tricky things like ellipses or complex forms that move in compound surfaces, meaning both directions at the same time. Just sketch as much as you can and you'll get better. Please reach out if you have any other questions. Help me grow this channel and provide more content by liking and subscribing this video. Thank you so much.